Hey, what is going on, everybody? Welcome into the final starts and sits of this NFL season. I can't believe it's here. Playoffs start next week. I swear the season flies by every single year, and now we got to wait, uh, 9 months until we finally get some real football. Well, we got real football for a month, but until the football seasons for all 32 teams starts back up. With that being said, I did promise you guys I was going to do a start sits this week. As I said last week, though, if you do have a Week 18 championship game, go talk to your commissioner so next year that the championship game is set in Week 17. That is when it should be, because as you guys have probably already know, there's tons of players not playing this weekend because either their playoff spots are locked up, they're banged up. It's not worth a team that's even out of the playoffs to even risk playing a player to get hurt. So that's why you definitely don't want your Week 18 championship. If you did have a Week 17 championship, your fantasy leagues are wrapped up. I hope you won. Congratulations if you did. And if you guys have been following me around all season long, as I said with my start sits videos, you can always take this information for daily lineups. That's where I'm going to be taking some of this information when I do my daily lineups, my prop bets as well. I didn't factor them in here, but I would recommend going out and checking out. There's plenty of articles and videos out there talking about player incentives that they have to hit to make some money this weekend. And that's where you can kind of lean into your prop bets as well. With that being said, I'm going to dive into this video. It's my normal video, top 2 starts and sits at quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. And as I promised last week, I am going to do a top 5 streaming defenses. I'll get to that section later. But yeah, let's just go ahead and dive right into the video. My top start of the week at quarterback, I am going to go with Jaden Daniels against the Cowboys. Cowboys have allowed the second most points per game against quarterbacks this season. In their first matchup this season, he threw for 275 passing yards, had 2 touchdowns, did throw 2 interceptions in that game, but he also had 74 rushing yards and a touchdown on the ground. In their last 4 games, Dallas has allowed 3 different quarterbacks to finish with at least 215 passing yards, and they've given up 9 passing touchdowns in this game. And you might be wondering, hey, they're already locked in the playoff spot. They can't win the NFC East. Well, the Commanders are going to want to win this game, because if they win this game, they'll lock in the 6th seed, and they don't want to be, because if they lose this game and the Packers win, and then the Commanders would drop to the 7th seed and either have to play the loser. They would have to play the loser of either the between the Vikings and the Lions game in round 1. So they do have a reason why to play their starters and go win this game. I will admit too, there's kind of a worry, though, if the Commanders were to get a big lead in this game, or if for whatever reason Dallas would go up big, maybe they might start pulling starters at some point just to make sure that they're healthy for the wild card weekend. My other start, this is a guy you know is going to be playing all game because they have to win and have to have the Bucks lose to win the division and get into the playoffs. I would roll the dice on the rookie quarterback for Atlanta, Michael Penix Jr. against the Panthers. Panthers are tied for the 3rd most allowed points per game against quarterbacks this season. In their last 4 games, the Panthers have allowed 3 quarterbacks to throw for at least 200 passing yards. And then why I really like him as well is they have given up 11 passing touchdowns over those last 4 games. My top 2 sits, these will be pretty quick for you guys. I'm going to go ahead and say sit CJ Stroud against the Titans just because it's not worth the risk. I mean, they're in the middle of the pack as far as points per game against quarterbacks, but we don't know how long the starters are going to play. Honestly, they have no reason to play the starters. The Texans are locked into the 4th seed, but DeMeco Ryan says they do plan on playing the starters to kind of get that bad taste out of their mouths from that loss against the Ravens. I think they kind of need some good momentum going into this game, but he said that they're going to see how this game goes and to manage their reps. So that's why it's not worth the start. What if they just go out there, play 2 series, as long as they maybe get maybe lead a touchdown drive and a field goal drive? I could see them pulling CJ Stroud sooner than later in this matchup. Same thing with Justin Herbert. This one's kind of interesting because the Chargers did say they do plan on playing their starters, but I'm still suggesting Justin Herbert against the Raiders for a few reasons. Now, the Raiders are in the middle of the pack as far as points per game, allowing 16th fewest points per game against quarterbacks. Now, here's the thing. It could be maybe decided at Sunday. They're not going to play their starters. So what this is, if the Steelers were to beat the Bengals tomorrow on Saturday, the Chargers will be locked into the 6th seed. Now, if the Bengals beat the Steelers, the Chargers would have a reason to play because if they would win and the Steelers lose, they would jump up to the 5th seed and have to play the Texans. Ideally, if obviously I think everybody knows this, if you're a wild card team, ideally you're going to want to play the Texans with how they've looked over the past month. And then some other reasons to factor in, like maybe you don't want to play Herbert this weekend, besides the fact that he could get pulled at any point or not even start on Sunday if the Steelers were to win on Saturday. Is now they have given up yards. 3 quarterbacks have finished with 215 passing yards, but they've only given up 6 passing touchdowns in their last 4 games. Moving into the running back spot, I got a couple potential streaming options. If you are in a Week 18 championship and maybe your running back is sitting, like a Saquon Barkley, obviously you can see his backups' names here. Let's go over the top starts really quick. Ray Davis and Ty Johnson against the Patriots. Obviously, the Bills have nothing to play for. They're going to start Josh Allen for a series or two just so he can keep his starting streak going. But he's going to get pulled right away. Honestly, I don't think James Cook's going to be suiting up, in my opinion. Maybe he does suit up and maybe gets a touch or two. So that's why I think it's worth a roll the dice on the backup running backs. Going against the Patriots, who have allowed the 3rd most points per game against running backs this season. In their last 4 games, New England has allowed 3 different running backs to finish with at least 95 rushing yards, and they've given up 6 running back touchdowns in those games. And then my other start, I am going to go with Kenneth Gainwell against the Giants. I think he's worth a roll of dice. Obviously, Saquon's not playing. Jalen Hurts is ruled out. Kenny Pickett's kind of banged up, so it might be Tanner McKee at the quarterback position, which makes me think they're just going to lean into the rushing attack. And Kenneth Gainwell does have a good matchup to take advantage of. Going against the Giants defense has tied for the 4th most points per game allowed against running backs this season. In the first matchup alone, Saquon went off in that game, and obviously he dominated the touches. But with that being said, in that first matchup, Gainwell still had 67 total yards against them. And then in their last 4 games, 2 running backs have finished with at least 75 total yards, and they've given up 6 running back touchdowns in those games. Now, my top sit. Now, if you're in a Week 18 championship with how many players are sitting, I get it. You're probably going to play Devin Achane. I would just understand that he could have a floor outcome in this game, especially since Tua is not at quarterback. It's going to be Tyler Huntley. If the Jets were smart, they're going to load up and try to bottle up the rushing attack and force Tyler Huntley to beat them. With that being said, I still don't like necessarily his matchup for Devin Achane this weekend. Going against the Jets defense, who's allowed the 10th fewest points per game against running backs this season. Now, he had a floor outing in the first matchup. He had 69 total yards and a touchdown. The touchdown basically saved his day. 45 of those 69 total yards were through the air, with those were receiving yards. And now keep in mind, the quarterback for that game was Tua. And then over their last 4 games, only 1 running back crossed over 65 rushing yards. That was Kieran Williams. And they've only given up 3 running back touchdowns in the last 4 games. So if you're in a Week 18 championship game, I understand why you'd want to play him. But if you're going to be doing daily lineups or maybe prop bets, I would maybe consider looking to avoid Achane this weekend. Another running back where you might be forced to play him because of if you're in a Week 18 championship game, just because of all the players that are not playing this weekend. But if you can look to avoid him, I will. I definitely will be looking to avoid him in my daily lineups. But I am going to suggest sitting Zach Charbonnet against the Rams. The Rams are allowing the 12th fewest points per game against running backs this year. One of my reasons is Geno Smith has a passing yard incentive. I think it's like right close to the 200-yard mark for him to earn, I want to say, $2 or $3 million this weekend. So that makes me think they're going to be doing a pass-heavy attack to get him to that mark, which could limit the reps and touches for Zach Charbonnet this weekend. And then you look at the last 4 games for the Rams, the most rushing yards that they allowed was 70 rushing yards, and that was this past weekend to Michael Carter from the Cardinals. And then why I also don't like him is they've only given up 1 running back touchdown in their last 4 games as well. Now moving into my starts and sits for my wide receiver spot, for the wide receiver position, my top start of the week, I am going to go with Jameson Williams against the Vikings. The Vikings have allowed the most points per game against wide receivers this season. Over the last 4 games, they have allowed 4 different wide receivers to finish with 80 yards at least. They've only given up 4 wide receiver touchdowns, but doesn't this game feel like a potential shootout, even though I'm going to be suggesting to sit a couple players in that matchup in the next segment? But I could see Jameson Hawkinson having a big outing against Minnesota in that Sunday night, especially because I'm sure the Vikings are going to try to take away Amon-Ra St. Brown, which should hopefully open up things for Williams to have a big night this weekend. My other top start, I'm going to go with Zay Flowers against the Browns. The reasons why are the Browns have allowed the second most points per game against wide receivers this season. In the first matchup earlier this season, he had 7 receptions for 115 yards. In their last 4 games, they've 2 different wide receivers that are leading wide receivers for their team to reach at least 95 receiving yards, and they've given up 5 wide receiver touchdowns. Now, yes, the Ravens do have to win this game to win the North, so they do have something to play for. I will admit there is a little bit of a risk playing Zay this week because, the Ravens are, 18-point favorites, so if the Ravens do get a big lead, I could definitely see Zay getting pulled at some point. So maybe in your daily lineups, you just more take of a chance on a Nelson Aguilar or a Rashad Bateman. But I still think it's worth the roll of the dice just because they do have something to play for. And I could see Zay at least getting like 75 receiving yards and a touchdown before they pull him to get that big lead on Cleveland tomorrow on Saturday afternoon. My other sits, I'm feeding off my top sits of the quarterback position. My top sit, Nico Collins against the Titans. First of all, the Titans, they've actually allowed the second fewest points per game against wide receivers this season. But same reason as Stroud. As I mentioned earlier, D'Amico Ryan said they're going to see how the game goes to manage their starting reps. As I mentioned, I could see them only playing maybe a quarter at tops, maybe a half of football. And if you play Nico Collins this weekend and he doesn't get that production that you need before he's pulled, it's just not worth the risk to me. So I'd be looking at other options at the wide receiver spot. My other sit, I am, just like I said about Herbert, Ladd McConkey against the Raiders. The Raiders have allowed, surprisingly, just like the Titans, right? 2 of the worst teams in the league, but they have actually allowed a lot of points per game against wide receivers. They've actually allowed the 5th fewest points per game against wide receivers this season. That first matchup against the Raiders this season, he only had 5 receptions for 39 yards, and he had a touchdown. So basically, the touchdown did save his day. Over their last 4 games, only 1 wide receiver crossed over 70 receiving yards against Las Vegas. That was Brian Thomas Jr. And they've only given up 4 wide receiver touchdowns in those games. But the biggest reason, like I mentioned, if the Steelers do win tomorrow night against the Bengals, the Chargers are locked into the 6th seed. They have nothing to play for. So I could see them making maybe a smart decision before the game would start and decide not to play their starters or to pull their starters early in that game. Moving into the top starts and sits at the tight end position. My top star of the week, if you want to roll the dice on him, I'm going to go with Kyle Pitts against the Panthers. The Panthers have allowed the most points per game against tight ends this season. In their first matchup this season, Pitts actually had one of his better games of the season with 3 receptions for 70 yards. And the biggest reason why I like him is they are the only team in the NFL to allow double-digit tight end touchdowns this season. They've given up 11 touchdowns to tight ends this year. Another matchup, these guys, this is for tomorrow, so you'd want to get him in before that game gets started tomorrow night. Pat Freiermuth against the Bengals. Bengals have allowed the 2nd most points per game against tight ends this year. In the first matchup against the Bengals, Freiermuth had 6 receptions for 68 yards and a touchdown. And then they are tied for the 2nd most tight end touchdowns allowed this year. They've given up 9 so far. My top sits. Now, I get it. You guys want to take a roll of the dice on these guys, I would do it just because, like I mentioned, I can see this Lions-Vikings game being a barn burner, like first team to 40 points wins, which is usually if you think that you're going to want to be playing players in that matchup. So if you do play them, I would just have a floor expectation that they might not have the best outcome for them, just because they do have a tough matchup. So I am suggesting sitting TJ Hawkinson against the Lions. The Lions have actually allowed the 3rd fewest points per game against tight ends this year. Now in that first matchup, Hawkinson was on the IR, but the biggest reason why is they've only given up 3 tight end touchdowns this season, which is tied for the 3rd fewest. So I feel like he wouldn't get you the yards this season in this matchup. You'd be hoping that maybe he can find a way to get to the end zone. Same thing with Sam Laporta against the Vikings. Vikings are actually tied for the 7th fewest points per game against tight ends. Now, in that first matchup, which I think was I think both teams got the 30 points, but it was a high-scoring affair right? So you'd think that Laporta had a big had a highly productive game in a game like that, but he only had one reception for 25 yards against Minnesota the first time around this year. And just like the Lions, the Vikings also have only given up 3 tight end touchdowns this season, which, like I mentioned, is tied for the third fewest this year. And then, like I mentioned, I'm gonna mention some streaming defenses, as I did all season long too. These defenses, they do have to have at least 50% roster availability, and I did this yesterday or last night, so that these numbers could have changed before now. But yeah, these are the best defenses that you could possibly pick up if you're in a Week 18 championship game to stream. And these are some defenses to maybe consider if you do daily lineups that include team defenses as well. Number one streaming defense is the Bucks against the Saints. They're at home. The Bucks are tied for the 5th most sacks. As I mentioned earlier, the Bucks need to win this game to win their division, so they do have something to play for. We've seen how big of a mess the Saints offense has been with Spencer Rattler or Jake Hayner. I think Alvin Kamara is not going to be playing this weekend, so yeah, this is easily the best streaming option available that qualifies for my list. The other one, I do like the Texans against the Titans. Texans are available in 57% of the leagues. Houston's defense has been really good at getting sacks and takeaways this season. They're tied for the 3rd most sacks in the NFL, and they have the 3rd most takeaways. The Titans have the most giveaways, and it did come out that Will Levis is going to be starting this game. So even if the Texans were going to start pulling maybe like a Will Anderson and Derek Stingley, some of their top players, they still got to play players. When you understand, when the teams that say they're going to pull starters, only like 7 or 10, like I think like 6 to 10 at tops, I think that they can honestly pull just because of the roster size, right? So there's going to be some starting players from the Houston defense in that matchup. And honestly, I don't really care who's in it. We've seen Will Levis turn the ball over plenty of times this season, so I'd be willing to roll the dice on it. Then the Commanders against the Cowboys. The Commanders are available in 65% of the leagues. Dallas is tied for the 4th most giveaways this season. Like I mentioned, the Commanders do have something to play for. If they win, they avoid getting the 7th seed, and that way they don't have to play the Lions or Vikings next week. So I can see the Commanders defense coming out and playing hard on Sunday. Another one, this game has nothing to play for, but I'm going to suggest the Cardinals against the 49ers. The Cardinals are available in 76% of the leagues. Brock Purdy isn't playing in this game. It's going to be Joshua Dobbs, so that's why I'm definitely willing to roll the dice on a backup quarterback. This is a home game for Arizona, and what's surprising because of the 49ers of the past anyways, but yeah, the 49ers are actually surprisingly tied for the 5th most giveaways this year. Another one, this would be extreme roll of the dice. It's going to be Joe Flacco starting at quarterback for the Colts, but if you wanted to roll the dice on the Jaguars, I would understand it. Jaguars are available in 86% of the leagues. The Colts actually do have the 3rd most giveaways. Flacco is not prone to turning the ball over. He threw 2 interceptions against the Giants last week. The Jaguars have been racking up some sacks as of late as well, and Flacco is a statue back there, and the Colts offensive line let him get sacked I think like 4 times against the Giants. So that would be like a 12-14 team league. Maybe you wanted a cheap option to go at the defense, you want to roll the dice on a daily lineups, but yeah. So yeah, those are my top starts and sits, and a streamable defense, quick streamable defense portion for you guys. I wish you guys the best of luck if you are playing in a Week 18 championship. I do want to thank everybody for following along with me this season through all my waiver wire, streamable defenses, and start sits this season. I'm going to try to do better and do some off-season content, not necessarily fantasy related. Maybe I'll do something with the playoffs. I'm trying to debate what I want to do. I want to maybe do something for the draft as well. I'm not going to make any promises, but I want to be able to provide some off-season content over these next few months. So stay tuned for that. Make sure you do follow and subscribe me on all my platforms. I'm on X, TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram. I'm not sure when you guys will see me again, but I'll hopefully talk to you soon. Peace out.